The storm had raged for 3 days, turning the mountain into a frozen wasteland. Thick layers of snow buried the cabin, sealing off any chance of escape. Inside, Nathan Kane, once a feared warlord on Earth's battlegrounds, sat by the fire, his breath visible in the frigid air. He was a survivor, a man who had led armies, conquered territories, and torn through enemies like a storm of his own. Yet here, in his isolated cabin, something strange was happening. His supplies were disappearing. It started small, half a loaf of bread gone, a can of soup missing. At first, he thought he had miscounted, but then he saw the footprints. Bare, small, not human. They led from his pantry to the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Nathan wasn't a man who feared the unknown, but he didn't like surprises. He set up a camera near the pantry, determined to catch the thief. That night, as the wind howled outside, he reviewed the footage. The moment he saw the figure, his blood turned cold. She was small, her skin an icy blue that almost blended with the dim light. Her limbs were delicate but wiry, her movements cautious, desperate. She had eyes too large for her face, black and shimmering, filled with fear. She wasn't human. Nathan grabbed his rifle, his instincts kicking in. He had seen creatures before, on the battlefields where Earth fought against off-world invaders, in black market trading hubs where alien slaves were sold like cattle. But this one, she was terrified. He moved silently, lifting the hatch to the crawl space, expecting her to bolt. Instead, she pressed herself against the corner, shaking. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. She flinched, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Then, to his shock, she whispered, "Please, don't let them find me." Them. Nathan lowered his rifle slightly, narrowing his eyes. "Who?" Her hands trembled as she pointed toward the window, where the storm raged on. "They're coming." Nathan didn't move. He studied her. Every shaky breath, every twitch of her fingers. She wasn't just cold. She was petrified. "Who's coming?" he asked again, his voice low but firm. The alien woman swallowed hard, her throat working as if she were forcing down a scream. "Hunters," she whispered. "They won't stop until they find me." Nathan's grip on the rifle tightened. He had seen hunters before, the kind that stalked fugitives across galaxies, the kind that never left loose ends. "You led them here?" he asked, his tone sharp. She flinched. I didn't mean to. I thought I could hide. I thought I was safe." Nathan exhaled through his nose. He wasn't in the business of charity. He'd spent years killing, fighting, surviving. But something about the way she looked at him, wide, desperate eyes filled with exhaustion and fear, struck something deep inside him. "What's your name?" he asked, lowering the rifle a fraction. She hesitated, then whispered, "Lirien." Nathan nodded. "All right, Lirien. You've been stealing my food, hiding in my damn house, and now you tell me you've got something nasty on your tail. You better start explaining. Fast." Lirien clenched her hands into fists, glancing at the window again. The storm outside masked most sounds, but even then, Nathan thought he heard something. A low hum, a vibration in the air. "They took me from my world," she said, voice barely audible. "Years ago. Sold me to a warship, one that hunts, raids, destroys. I escaped when we landed here. But they don't lose their prey." Nathan felt his stomach tighten. What kind of warship? Lirien's hands curled into the fabric of the oversized coat she'd stolen from his closet. "They call themselves the Ral'Zeth. They don't trade. They don't negotiate. They burn everything in their path." Nathan cursed under his breath. He had heard of the Ral'Zeth before. Brutal, nomadic war clans that took what they wanted and left planets in ruins. If they were here, looking for her, this wasn't just a problem. It was a death sentence. "How many?" he asked. "At least 6. Maybe more." 6 Ral'Zeth hunters in a storm this bad? It meant they were close enough to track her even in these conditions. Which meant time was running out. Nathan stood up, grabbed his coat, and started checking his weapons. What are you doing?" Lirien asked, standing up too fast and stumbling slightly. "Getting ready," he said. "If they're coming, we either fight or run." "And I don't run." She stared at him like she didn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You don't have to help me," he scoffed. "Yeah, I do. Because if they're after you, that means my home is already a target. And if I don't deal with them first, we're both dead." Lirien hesitated, then nodded. "Then we fight." Nathan almost smirked. "Almost. Hope you know how to use a gun," he said. Lirien flexed her fingers, the air around her crackling slightly. "I don't need one." That's when he realized. She wasn't just some scared runaway. She had power. And the Ral'Zeth wanted her back. Badly. Nathan watched as a faint blue energy pulsed through Lirien's hands, crackling like frozen lightning. He had seen energy wielders before, aliens with abilities that could turn the tide of a battle. Some could incinerate an entire platoon with a thought. Others could warp time itself. But Lirien didn't look like a warrior. She looked like someone who had spent her entire life running. "You've got powers," Nathan said, keeping his voice level. "Why didn't you use them to escape sooner?" Lirien winced, flexing her fingers. "Because using them leaves a trace. The more I use my energy, the easier they can track me." She exhaled sharply. "I barely used anything when I fled, but it must have been enough." "They're close. Too close." Nathan cursed under his breath. If that was true, then fighting them head-on wasn't an option. Not yet. He moved to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain. The storm still raged, wind screaming against the cabin walls. Visibility was nearly zero. That was both good and bad. Good because it would slow down the Ral'Zeth hunters. Bad because it meant he couldn't see them coming either. A sudden noise outside. Low, metallic, like something slicing through the wind. Nathan's instinct screamed at him. He grabbed Lirien and pulled her down just as the wall behind them exploded. Splinters of wood and snow blasted through the room as something massive tore through the cabin's outer structure. Nathan hit the floor hard, shielding Lirien with his body. Through the haze of dust and debris, he saw movement, a figure stepping through the wreckage. It was tall, 7 feet, maybe more, broad-shouldered, wrapped in thick armor that shimmered with a strange, oily sheen. Its helmet was smooth, featureless except for 2 slitted red eyes that glowed like embers. A Ral'Zeth hunter. It scanned the room, its head tilting slightly. Then it spoke, its voice a deep, mechanical growl. "Target acquired." Nathan didn't think. He moved. In one swift motion, he grabbed the shotgun from the table and fired. The blast hit the hunter square in the chest, but the thing barely flinched. The impact sent a ripple across its armor, dispersing the energy like a stone skipping over water. Nathan cursed. "That's new." The hunter raised its arm. Something hissed, and a blade shot forward from its wrist, pulsing with dark energy. Then Lirien screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was something else. Something raw, something powerful. The temperature in the room plummeted instantly. Ice cracked along the wooden floor, racing toward the hunter's feet. Frost crawled up its armor, thickening, freezing. The hunter tried to move. It was too late. With a sound like shattering glass, its legs locked in place, frozen solid. Nathan didn't waste the opportunity. He pulled his sidearm and aimed for the one spot armor couldn't protect, the narrow slit between the helmet and the chest plate. One shot. The hunter jerked. A strange, gurgling sound escaped its throat, and then it toppled, collapsing in a heap. Silence. Lirien was breathing hard, her hands trembling. The air around her shimmered with frost. Nathan exhaled, stepping back. "Remind me not to piss you off." But before she could respond, a deep, guttural voice echoed from outside. "Unit down." Proceeding with elimination. Nathan turned toward the window, his stomach sinking. Through the swirling snow, 5 more figures emerged from the storm. The real fight had just begun. Nathan's grip tightened on his rifle as he watched the 5 Ral'Zeth hunters move through the storm. Their glowing red eyes pierced the swirling snow, scanning, calculating. These weren't mindless brutes. They were predators, and now they had him and Lirien locked in their sights. "We can't stay here," Lirien whispered, her breath still visible in the freezing air. "They'll surround us." Nathan's mind raced. The cabin was compromised, and they were outnumbered. But he wasn't one to roll over and die. "There's a back exit," he said, grabbing his pack. We move fast. Stay low. And if you have any more of that ice trick up your sleeve, now's the time to use it. Lirien nodded, still shaken but determined. Nathan led the way, ducking into the hallway as the hunters advanced. The sound of their heavy boots crunching through the wreckage made his pulse quicken. These things were faster than they looked, and from the way they moved, they had a plan. He kicked open the back door, revealing the blinding whiteout outside. The cold hit them like a hammer, but it was better than waiting to die inside. Go, he ordered, pushing Lirien ahead. They sprinted into the storm, the wind tearing at their clothes. The snow was deep, slowing them down, but it would slow the hunters too. Nathan had spent years in harsh environments, deserts, jungles, war-torn cities, but the freezing wilderness of the mountains was its own battlefield. Behind them, a metallic screech split the air. Nathan risked a glance back, just in time to see a hunter leap onto the roof of the cabin. It crouched like some monstrous insect, scanning the snow. Then, with terrifying precision, it raised its arm. A red laser painted a dot on Nathan's chest. Down, he shouted, tackling Lirien just as a plasma shot seared through the air where his head had been. The heat of it burned against his skin, even through his coat. Keep moving, he growled, dragging her up. Lirien clenched her fists, her breath ragged. I can slow them down, she said, but it'll make it easier for them to track us. Not an option, Nathan snapped. We need distance first. The terrain was brutal, uneven, icy, the wind howling in every direction. But Nathan knew these mountains. A mile west was an old hunting lodge, abandoned for years. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. West, he told Lirien. Follow me. They pushed forward, the hunters closing in behind them. The sound of mechanical limbs cutting through snow sent chills down Nathan's spine. These things weren't stopping. Another shot rang out, this one barely missing Lirien. She gasped, stumbling. But before she could fall, Nathan caught her, swinging his rifle around in the same motion. He fired. The bullet struck one of the hunters in the shoulder, staggering it. Not enough to kill, but enough to buy time. Then Lirien did something unexpected. She turned, raised her hands, and the air around them cracked. A sudden burst of frost exploded outward, a shockwave of ice racing toward the hunters. It wasn't enough to freeze them solid, but it slowed them, their movements sluggish, the snow beneath them turning to a treacherous sheet of ice. Nathan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lirien's arm and pulled her forward. The lodge was close, just a little further. A loud, inhuman roar echoed behind them. Rage, frustration. The hunters were fighting against the ice, breaking free. They're adapting, Lirien gasped. Then we move faster, Nathan said. They reached the lodge just as another plasma shot screamed past them. Nathan kicked the door open, shoving Lirien inside before slamming it shut. Darkness. Cold. Silence. Lirien was panting, her back against the wall. They're not going to stop, she whispered. Nathan nodded, checking his ammo. Yeah, but neither am I. A moment passed. Then Lirien looked at him, her black eyes gleaming in the dim light. You don't even know why they want me, do you? She said quietly. Nathan frowned. You said you were a slave. Lirien hesitated. Then, finally, she spoke. I wasn't just a slave, she admitted. I was supposed to be their queen. Nathan's breath stalled. Before he could respond, the door behind them shook violently. The Ral'Zeth had found them, and this time, they weren't holding back. Nathan stared at her, his grip tightening around his rifle. Their queen? Lirien swallowed, her dark eyes flickering with something unreadable. I was taken when I was young, she said quickly. Raised in their ways, trained to be their weapon. But I wasn't like them. I didn't want to rule. I didn't want to kill. So I ran. Outside, the Ral'Zeth pounded on the door, their deep growls vibrating through the wooden walls. The lodge wouldn't hold for long. Nathan exhaled. You're telling me you're the heir to a bunch of alien warlords? Lirien flinched at the word. I'm telling you, I'm the only one who can stop them. Nathan didn't have time to process that. Right now, survival was the only priority. He turned, scanning the room. Old furniture, broken cabinets, dust-covered hunting gear. Nothing useful for a fight. But there was a hatch in the floor. A basement. "Move," he ordered, pulling Lirien toward it. He ripped the hatch open, revealing a dark, narrow space beneath the floor. Lirien hesitated. "Nathan, they'll find us. Not if we make them think we ran." He grabbed an old lantern, shattered the glass, and tossed the burning wick onto the wooden floor. Flames licked up the walls. "Now go." They dropped into the basement just as the front door caved in. Heavy boots stomped inside, and through the cracks in the floorboards, Nathan saw them. 5 towering figures, their glowing red eyes scanning the burning lodge. They escaped. One of them rasped. Another sniffed the air. "No, they're still here." Lirien tensed beside him, barely breathing. Nathan clenched his jaw. If they were caught here, it was over. Then, one of the hunters turned toward the fire. "Let it burn," he growled. "If she dies, the warlords will choose another." Nathan's heart pounded. They weren't trying to capture her anymore. They were here to erase her. The flames spread fast. Smoke curled down into the basement, stinging Nathan's lungs. Lirien coughed, pressing a hand to her mouth. They needed to move. Nathan scanned the darkness, searching for another way out. Then he saw it. A narrow tunnel at the far end of the basement, half collapsed but still open. A possible escape. He grabbed Lirien's arm. "This way." She didn't argue. They crawled through the tight passage, the heat from the fire pressing against their backs. The lodge above groaned, the structure weakening. Then, an explosion. Nathan barely had time to shield Lirien as the blast ripped through the lodge, sending debris crashing down. Smoke filled the tunnel. His ears rang. For a moment, everything was still. Then, cold air. Open space. They had made it outside. Nathan stumbled out first, dragging Lirien behind him. The lodge was a blazing inferno now, the hunters standing in front of it, their backs turned. "They think we're dead," Lirien whispered. Nathan nodded, his mind racing. "Which means we have a chance." He checked his gear. Low ammo. No shelter. No backup. They were on their own. Lirien turned to him, her eyes burning with something fierce. "Nathan, I can't run forever. If we don't stop them now, they'll never stop hunting me." Nathan exhaled. He had been a warlord once. He knew what it meant to be hunted. To fight, to kill, to survive. And he wasn't about to let some alien warlords decide who lived and who died. "Then we end this," he said. Lirien's expression hardened. "I need to face them." "You will," Nathan said. "But not alone." The storm had settled by the time they reached the valley below. The Ral'Zeth's ship was there. A monstrous black vessel half buried in ice, its engines humming with raw power. Nathan crouched beside Lirien, scanning the area. 2 guards at the entrance, he muttered. "The rest are probably inside." Lirien's hands trembled as she pressed her palms into the snow. "I can freeze the entrance," she whispered. "Trap them inside." Nathan nodded. "Do it. I'll take care of the guards." Before she could argue, he moved. Silent. Fast. The first guard never saw him coming. Nathan slammed the butt of his rifle into the back of its skull, dropping it instantly. The second turned, raising its weapon. Too slow. Nathan grabbed its arm, twisted hard, and drove his knife into its throat. The body collapsed, steaming blood staining the snow. Lirien moved next, her hands glowing with icy energy. The ground trembled beneath them as ice snaked up the ship's entrance, sealing the hatch shut in a thick, unbreakable layer of frost. Inside, the Ral'Zeth roared in rage, pounding against the walls. Nathan turned to Lirien. "Can you bring it down?" She hesitated. I don't know." Nathan gritted his teeth. "Then we find another way." He spotted a control panel near the base of the ship. If they could overload the system, they could take the entire vessel down. "Lirien, cover me." He sprinted toward the panel, dodging plasma fire from the remaining hunters. Lirien raised her hands, sending a blast of ice toward them, slowing their movements. Nathan reached the console and started working. He wasn't a tech expert, but he knew destruction. He pulled wires, ripped circuits, overloaded the power source. Alarms blared. Inside the ship, something cracked, then boom. The engines exploded, fire and ice colliding in a violent shockwave. The ship groaned, metal twisting, breaking apart. The Ral'Zeth inside screamed as the vessel collapsed, their bodies consumed by fire and falling debris. And then, silence. Nathan stood there, breathing hard, watching the wreckage burn. The Ral'Zeth were gone. Lirien exhaled shakily beside him. "It's over," she whispered. Nathan turned to her. "Yeah, it is." For a long moment, they just stood there, snow falling around them. Then Lirien met his gaze. "You could have left me." Nathan smirked. "Not my style." Lirien hesitated, then smiled, small, but real. Nathan exhaled, looking out at the frozen landscape. "So, what now?" Lirien glanced up at the stars, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she admitted. "But for the first time, I get to choose." Nathan nodded. "Then let's make it count." Together, they turned toward the horizon, two warriors who had defied fate. And in the endless cold of the mountain, beneath a sky full of stars, they walked forward, toward whatever came next.